Welcome to the Sandhills Media Ministry. We hope this production encourages and challenges you to live a more Christ-centered life. Hey, welcome to episode 5 of the Sandhills podcast. We are excited to be talking about current events this season. That's been our focus, and the current event of this week, Thanksgiving, is coming up on Thursday. And so we are excited to get to sit down with Pastor Jeff and talk about the reason for the season for Thanksgiving, talk about family, talk about sitting down with people that we love, or honestly, people that you might have difficulty with, situations you might be nervous about. So we get to have a wonderful conversation about how do we navigate tension in the family, how do we redirect anger or hostility, and how do we be the peacemakers at this time of Thanksgiving. We hope you enjoy it.
No, the only time you're really going to be free and fulfilled is when, as a created being, you begin to walk in the way that He's created you to operate.
But what you do need to do is just be a faithful representation of what you believe. Live it boldly, don't hedge on anything, and just simply be who you are for the sake of Christ and the gospel and the church. And don't think about it in terms of like, did I make sure that they understood that I think they're wrong?
In every generation, we need to evangelize the church.
There is no Christian culture. Christianity is the message of God's Son sacrificed on the cross for our salvation.
And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we going to choose Him or not?
And I often tell people don't leave church because of God. Mm-hmm. They leave because of other people.
All right. Here we go. So we're just going to jump right into it. Okay, what is your favorite part of the holidays?
All right, okay, so my favorite part of the holidays is, it's like, I tried to think of like a line, like what's most important. So family is actually my favorite part of the holidays. And then time off would also be a part. I just like where I can wake up at my leisure. And I could do kind of whatever my day isn't fully planned. I mean, there may be family stuff we're doing, but so time off. And then rich food and drink. That would be another thing, is like just having, like, I can, I hesitate to use the word gluttony, but but if I could dabble in a bit of gluttony, just like I'm going to have an extra piece of pie today, I'm going to eat a little too much food tonight, and then after I settle for about an hour, I'm going back, that kind of, I do love that.
Absolutely, you're going back.
Yeah. And so that's part of the Thanksgiving thing. Like if you include Christmas as a part of this, for me, and I'm not a gifts person per se, but like the gifts are so not a part of, like, if you're, what are you looking forward to for Christmas? What gift are you looking for? Like, I don't even care. Like my gift at Christmas, and maybe this is a stage of life, my gift at Christmas is family, time off, enjoying food and drink, and just relaxing. Like that's my favorite part of the holiday. Yeah.
That's to circle back real quick to what you said about the gluttony thing. This is something that I was been very interested in, because on the one hand you see God say don't be gluttonous, right. But on the other hand you see Him set up multiple feast days,
right?
An entire feast like year, sure. Every 7 years,
yeah. And
so you see this idea that gluttony is not supposed to be a part of our everyday life, but
right.
when He's giving us a feast and we're supposed to be thankful, and
right.
He's like, yeah, that's a form of worship, is to enjoy the fruit.
There's actually in the Old Testament, and I'd have to find it. I should have found it for today, but this command to enjoy food and strong drink during the celebration. It's a command by God. You're like, oh, interesting.
And it says in Isaiah, He's prepared the fortified wine for us for eternity. Yeah. And the fortified wine is
it's the good stuff.
That's the potent stuff. That's going to get you every time.
Yeah.
And so really, I think that's one of my favorite parts is, if you're focusing on the right things, like you said, you could get distracted by the gifts and stuff, and we'll talk about that on the kind of the Christmas side of it. But if you take the time for Thanksgiving to really slow down and give thanks, it can become a really special time of just enjoying life.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
right.
So, yeah. I think family's probably my favorite part,
right?
As well, as I'm thinking about it, because it's especially, my family's military all over the country. So whenever we can get together and spend time with one another, it's always really special. And a lot of board games are played, and so that's always fun.
That's great too. Yeah, whatever your family tradition is. Yeah,
just quality time. When do you guys eat Thanksgiving? Are you guys, because some people say like you don't eat till like 6 p.m. and I'm like, how do you do that? I couldn't do it. Do you guys do 6 p.m.?
So I'll just eat when the food's there, and it takes a while to prepare. So a lot of food is being prepared for hours, beforehand, and so I'm really flexible on when we.
As soon as it comes out the oven, great.
If we can just dabble. You want me to cut the turkey? I'll cut the turkey. I'll be glad. I'll get that ready for you, and of course I'll be over there sampling and all that kind of thing. But yeah, no, we don't have a set time. In fact, my side note here is like. Our Thanksgiving's messed up. Like, this is just where we are now. So, like a bit of reality in our lives, and probably for other people as well. So, our Thanksgiving used to be amazing because we would have, like, my mom would be in the kitchen all day, and family would come in, and it was just a big deal. And mom would decorate as well, and so we had all that. And then we had another side of the family. I got married, and then now we're making a trip. We spent a little bit of Thanksgiving here, a little bit of Thanksgiving there, and then it got to a point where we just picked Thanksgiving in one place, and so that got messy. Well, then my mom passed, and so then it was just kind of Michelle's side of the family. We were doing stuff with them, and then her dad passed, and there were a couple of divorces, and so then just Thanksgiving just got messed up completely for our family. And then we're in this kind of like Thanksgiving no man's land where we were like talking to friends like, hey, want to have Thanksgiving together? But then it struck me, like the holidays are hard for people. Like, to be real about this, holidays get hard for people. And I think part of it is because traditions change. And as a kid, you grow up and it's a very safe, it's a very stable environment maybe. And then you get to this point where things start to change and you go into this, like, it's not like it used to be. And somewhere along the line, I was like, you know what I got to do? I'm just going to have to make this good. Like, it has to be like, I've got to stop lamenting the past because either I just embrace that, hey, it's just messy now and this is going to be our new tradition. Or you're just going to constantly be disappointed with the holidays. And that'll tank your holiday. It'll ruin the holiday of the people around you. And, there's no need for that. Like, the idea is, everything's different for me now. The food's different. The location's different. How we're doing it is different. But is God still with me? Is he still good? Like, yeah, I mean, like, don't lose sight of the big picture here. You still get some days off. You got football on TV.
There you go.
You get wonderful food. Like, make it what it is and stop lamenting the past. Otherwise, you kind of just ruin your own holiday. And it's never going to change. You'll just lament it every year. And it'll be a horrible time of year. And then you'll realize at the end of it all, before you take your last breath, I ruined all of my holidays. And so you don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's an important reminder, I think. And that's something Claire and I are obviously very young in our marriage, only 2 years in. And that's one of the things that we've even had to look at is, okay, we can't just recreate our childhood. We need to make our own traditions together. We need to create, memories and things like that. And if you get bogged down trying to just recreate a special moment from, 10 years ago, it'll never satisfy you. You know what I mean? I'm sure there's some spiritual connection there that could preach, if you think about it.
There's probably a message in there.
Yeah, somewhere in there. We're pastors. We'll make it work. But it's fascinating because so many songs, as I was kind of getting ready for this, kind of think about the holidays. Christmas music's right around the corner. Next week, it's going to start playing.
I'm surprised it's not playing already. It probably is somewhere, yeah.
So many of those songs are family-centric. Yet so many people, like you were saying, struggle with family dynamics. Right. And so with family making it so special and it being sung about so often, what happens when it's like awkward? How do you navigate that? What's some advice you would have on that?
When family gets awkward and when life gets awkward and the songs get awkward. Hey, let me talk about the songs for a second and then build into the question. So I think the songs historically, like if you go back, now I have to guess some because I didn't live during this time, like back in the 40s and 50s. I think part of it was this kind of Norman Rockwell, perfect family, idyllic situation type of thing, and the songs kind of reflected that. I don't know that families were ideal back then either. I just think that there was this picture of what family used to look like. But I think nowadays we have a greater degree of brokenness, and I think Satan has so deceived us when it comes to family and the importance of family and honoring your vows. And so, kids are born out of wedlock, families divorce, they remarry, and you've got this train wreck of family situations in so many circumstances. And so now I think it's the family emphasis in holiday songs is really tied to nostalgia. Like it used to be this way. I don't know that it actually kind of ever used to be that way, but that we hope it kind of used to be that way. And we're longing for something that we just don't have. And so I think that's why it works in there, because I think the songs tend to reflect our hopes and dreams more than anything else. And so this for me now tying into how does this, when you're in a messed up situation, you're in a messed up family. I think you're the one that has to reconcile this in your own heart, because others will never be able to satisfy you in how they're doing this thing. And so I think this becomes your journey in the midst of the messed up family, the messed up situation. And even if your family is kind of messed up, and even if you caused the mess up, I mean, there's just a part of it where you're like, hey, okay, you know what? It just is what it is. Let's just start from here, and we're going to have to figure this out as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes into the idea of, have you heard of Thanksgiving clapbacks?
So I'm familiar with the concept.
So it's really popular in the meme world. It's actually one of the things that I always look forward to on social media, like as Thanksgiving approaches. I think they're so fun. The pictures are funny. The situations are funny. But, comedy always has grains of truth in it.
Right.
And especially in the meme world, reflecting aspects of our society and culture. And so you can see that even though it's funny to talk about, one family member saying something and then you being really quickly able to give them a jibe back, it does highlight, though, that a lot of people walk into Thanksgiving ready for hostility. And how do we approach hostile environments like that, where it's like, man, I got to roll up into this house for 6 hours. How do I get through this?
No, that's a great question. And so for some perspective there, I want to start with a passage of scripture that I think ties into this, if you'll permit me here. So
I permit you.
You have no choice. You have no choice. I'm going to read it anyway. All right. This comes from Luke chapter 12. It starts in verse 16. And this is a very familiar parable if you've read much of the Bible. 12:16 starts off, the land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? And he said, I'll do this. I'll tear down my barns, and I'll build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So you hear that, parable, and I've always taken that to be this idea of, you lived for wealth, and then, now you're dead, and, you're a fool. And then I had a professor in seminary who just really challenged me. And basically he said to me, like, you've missed the point of the story. I was like, well, the point is don't be greedy. He's like, no, that's not the point. He said, did you catch the very last phrase there? And whose will they be? And so he said, like, that's the issue is at the expense of relationships, at the expense of a spouse, at the expense of kids, at the expense of building relationships with people you're related to, like, nobody now is going to get your stuff, because not only have you amassed wealth, but you've isolated yourself from the world. Your greatest failure is you have no relationships of value. And I was like, oh, wow, that really shocked me. So now coming into family situations, let's keep that in mind, because I think many of us, and we're in a world that can do this almost, is like, I don't need my family. I don't want them. I don't need them. In fact, you may just pop in, pop out on Thanksgiving, pop in, pop out on, Christmas. And like, my family's so messed up, I don't even want to be around them. Okay. And so like, there would be a part of me that's, okay, you probably need some counseling, but I would say, like, I get it. I do get it. Like, because there's just a way when you become a person, you become an adult, you become your own person, you're just wired different now than your family. And there are friends that you're probably like, you might think to yourself, it would be better if I just did Thanksgiving with my friends, people I like, and they like me. And then, my friends at Christmas as well, but that's not how we're wired. And so there's a reality we need to engage. The reality is your family is going to be with you the whole time. Like, they're never going away. Dads will always be dads. Moms will always be moms. Siblings will always be siblings. And this idea that these relationships are disposable, I'm just not behind. But they may not all be what we would love for them to be. And so now we can talk to practically how do we work this out. So there's this train car illustration I've heard. I've shared it with people a number of times. The idea that, life is a train car. You've got certain people who are in your car, and along the way, your car will hook up to other cars, but then release those cars. So in your main car are, your husband or your spouse, your wife, your kids, mom, dad, like all your blood relatives, and they're in your main car. Everything else you're just connected to. Friends, you just connect to. At some point, they may move, or you'll move, and you'll disconnect. And then your job, you connect, but then you disconnect. Most important thing is your immediate relationships. And so with that in mind, we need to embrace something of that in the holidays, although we can talk about ways to meter that situation, to control it. I'm reminded of Romans 12:18. Romans 12:18, the Apostle Paul is giving instruction to Christians. He says, as much as it's possible for you, live at peace with all men. And so I think there's this element of, when I come into Thanksgiving, when I come into Christmas, and I may be coming into, to be fair, some hostile territory, I'm going to be the peacemaker. And so as much as possible, I've got to do that. And I think, too, there's some very practical things. So we've all been in kind of weird family situations. I've had some over the years, and especially with Michelle's side of the family, we didn't always connect with some aunts and uncles who would be at Thanksgiving, and so there's some things we thought about. One is have an escape plan, just like how can we be present but not present, but yet people feel like we kind of get credit for being there, and so there were family members we did connect with. So out of a whole room full of people, there was like one family we really got along well with. They were just kind of wired like we were, and so we would get there, we would sit with them, we would talk, but then we'd interact with other people, at Thanksgiving like you do. You're chit-chatting. And then we would get a football, and we'd go outside with that other family, and we'd just throw the football around as kind of families. And it probably looked like, we were closer to them than others, but I think you were still there, you still made an appearance, you still hugged and kissed everybody and loved on them, asked questions about their job and their life. And so there's a part of that where I don't have to be best friends with everybody. Another part too is you got to have these I don't know, safe word or something like that, like get me out of this situation, get me out of here, and do something else. So I think you've got to strategically think through how you want to get through the situation, and then too, I think remember this, especially if you go into a toxic environment and Uncle so and so is going to bring up his politics, or Aunt so and so is going to berate this person or be mad about this sister or cousin or whatever, and they're just going to rant about him. And there's this thought like, I'm just going to tell them exactly what I think. And as soon as you get to that point, I'd say, okay, time out. Don't ever go there.
Wow, that's like World War I setting up.
I mean, seriously, is the thought, they probably just lack information. If I'll just give them enough information, they'll be, maybe my political view isn't correct here. Or maybe this cousin, maybe I'm the problem. Like, they're never going to believe that. Right. So, like, don't enter into that. Just have your eyes open. And, again, as much as possible, be at peace with all people. And I would say, too, be very careful. I've had some friends over the years do some things that I think are very unwise, and that is they have just cut off family. Like, we don't go see them anymore. And I'm like, oh, man, as a Christian, do you think that's the wisest thing? Like, not only have you eradicated a relationship that by blood is in it's going to be a part of you for the rest of your life, but you've lost all opportunity for influence. Like, what about, like, they're broken. They're hurting. Like, the truth. Like, if you're a Christian, they need to know the truth. And I get that they may not be teachable at this time, but what you can do is you can love on them, let them know you're a safe place, just absorb their venting for a little bit. So I think there's just some strategies to dealing with prickly family that I think you need to embrace. Yeah,
and how do we set those boundaries up and those mindsets when we get into situations like that? Because, I would agree with you that the majority of the time, just cutting people off is a cop-out, and just like, what, I'm not going to deal with it, because sometimes that involves the difficult work of loving someone unconditionally as Christ first loved us. And that's always a challenge that I've given myself with difficult friends or things like that, where I go, this individual has never wronged me as much as I've wronged Christ, and Christ was willing to forgive me.
Right.
And then gives me that power of forgiveness, because now it's, his power in me, and then we can show his love, and, we're witnesses all of a sudden.
Right.
But what happens then in the severe cases? Is it okay to be like, maybe a couple years off after something horrific has happened or things are coming to light? How do you balance that?
Well, I'm sure there's all sorts of individual responses you can have. I can tell you what we have done. So we have had a very toxic relationship in our lives, and it's the result of a weird divorce situation and remarriage, and then we have two families now, but we kind of liked both of them, and it's just a mess. And then we got invited one Christmas to go spend some Christmas time with this family that I'll be honest with you, as much as I love Jesus, I don't like this. I don't like this part of the family. They're not good people, in my opinion. They're really hard to be with. And so we talked about it. And we said, well, let's go. Let's go. I mean, we've got to represent their blood relatives, or at least one of them was. And so we went. And it was one of those where I'm really just the whole time trying to figure out what I can say and not say. Now, fortunately, there wasn't a lot of deep conversation, which I think actually helped. Like, we didn't go deep into anything, and I think we certainly felt uncomfortable being there. I think they felt uncomfortable with us being there. They probably invited us out of obligation. Maybe they thought we wouldn't come, but we went. But I will say, I'm glad we went. Because there was still, I think, a chance to be a witness for Christ a little bit in the midst of that. We certainly had some spiritual conversation because it was around Christmas time. And it was just part of the mess that we stepped into. But we just chose, like, we're not going to be contentious during this time. We're just going to go there, love, encourage, bring some gifts for kids, that kind of thing. So I don't know. I just think that there's a reality there. We've just got to learn to live with prickly people. We're in a society now where you don't, not only do you not have to choose to get along with difficult people, you mock them, you berate them, you put them down, you condemn them. That's the word of today. And I just think as Christians, we're not supposed to be that. We show something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the things that we had when I was in the Army Reserve that we talked about all the times for chaplains was called presence, ministry of presence.
Yeah.
And that's just where you're showing up. You're not having great, deep, life-altering conversations. A lot of times you're just there,
right.
And people are aware of your presence. But what that does is that it lets them know that you care enough to show up,
right,
and be there. And I think that principle is very true for family too. Like you're talking about, there could be a lot of hurt, a lot of situations that need to be worked through.
Right.
But even just showing up and having those service level conversations and choosing not to address it,
right.
Maybe in 4 years that person who's wronged you goes, I wronged them. But at least I know I can talk to them.
Sure.
And I can reconcile that relationship. And so it leaves the door open for the right things to happen. And I think one of the hard things as well is that in an era of instant gratification, playing the long game.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And being willing to play the long game and
right.
trusting God with the long game because he plays the long game.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
400 years of silence before Christ, 400 years in Egypt before the Exodus. He plays the long game.
Right.
And I think he can give us the strength to play the long game well.
Well, and I think that gets behind the concept that relationships aren't static. You know, this idea that I have a bad relationship with my mom or my dad or my cousin. We're like, okay, yeah, maybe now, but what about 10 years from now? In our family, we had an illustration of this. So we had a young couple that got out of sorts with their mom. And, I mean, they're an adult couple. They had a family, but got out of sorts with their mom. So they just stopped coming to family functions. And so we go to Thanksgiving, we go to Christmas, they weren't there. And I know they're thinking, like, hey, I'm going to show mom, you know. But then you've got all these family members that want to interact with them. Well, then they had to make a choice, too. Do they want to interact with us? So we reached out, like this one particular couple that we loved. We reached out to them, hey, we're going to be in town. You know, are you coming? I hope you're coming to Thanksgiving. And just dead silent. And, like, we called them, left a message, dead silent. And so I realized now they had to make another choice. Do we cut off all family members? Well, why are you cutting us off? I mean, we're not, like you and your mom's situation, like, I don't know what's going on there, but, like, we're not a part of that. But they cut us all out for, like, 5 years, like, just vanished from life. And it was like they were still doing okay, I suppose, but they weren't interacting with anybody. But see, here's the thing, too. They were active in the church. They serve in their church. And I'm like, wow, like, every week you're going, celebrating this Lord who forgives all things, you know, all this mess that you do. And you're not forgiving your mom for whatever's going on. And so because of that, you've polluted your relationship with everybody else in the family. Now they're sitting around talking about what's wrong with this couple. Like, it's a mess. And so, I don't know, there's something there here's where it's not static. So 5 years later or so, suddenly they're back. They just show back up, and then and they're acting like nothing's ever happened. They're friendly to everybody, smiling, returning texts and phone calls now. And I'm like, what happened? Well, they reconciled with their mom. And I'm like, oh gosh, you know, like, why didn't you, if you'd done that 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Like, we could have gotten
what
through
did we miss out on?
We could have gone through all this. Yeah, I know.
I think that's a good thing as well is don't miss out on the blessings that humility can bring sometimes as well, because it is rarely a one-way street of these things happening.
Right.
Sometimes it is, but not always. And just having the humility of saying, you know what, I'm not going to fight you on this argument, or you know what, I can admit that there are some things that I've done. Let's try and work through this and enjoy one another again and get back to how it was once at one point.
Right.
And like we said at the beginning, not that you're trying to recreate the past again, but that you can go, you know what, we can bring happiness back into this relationship.
Yeah.
And work on it and work toward it. And know that it'll take time, but we can get back there.
We can.
With humility and grace. And like it says in Jude, you know, peace, mercy, and love abounding. And that's what we need. We need it from God, and then from an overflow, we can show it to the world. And then it's hard to remember that our family is a part of the world.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think when you step into these situations, you know, choose to be winsome. That's what I would say. If you're going to go into this, like, oh, I've got this messed up family. Okay, a couple thoughts. One is choose to be winsome. You know, try to make your speech, the things you talk about, attractive and appealing. Don't you pick up the same mantra of either I'm with you, everybody else stinks, you know, blah, 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 or I'm on the other side, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Like, okay, stop that. For me, it would be like this. So you got it. Let's just name somebody like an Uncle Frank. And so Uncle Frank he is all about how the other political party is destroying this nation, and that's all he wants to rant about and whatever. He wants to watch his news station the whole time, and he's talking about the latest headline. And so like one of the things I think you could do is like, you can engage him about something, positive. Like, Uncle Frank, I hear you talking about this. Like, what's your dream? What is like other than I hope everybody else on the other side dies. That's other than
Let's flip it a little bit.
But like,
redirect.
what is it you're really shooting for here? Well, I just want a world where, and I think that's where you could get to some, because there's a moral behind that he's holding on to. So I would say dig for that gem, to get behind that. And so at the end he says, if I just want everybody to feel free and to be able to do, whatever it is, and be like, that is a noble thing. Like, I think there's something you can do in that. And then also I would say, learn from masters of conversation. So over a few years of my life or times of my life, I've met people I would consider masters of conversation. And that is, and here's how for me, where like when I leave the conversation, I'm like, I feel amazing. I think that person's amazing. Like, what was it that just happened in this moment? And so I've tried to think through these guys who I've talked to, and at the end, and I think I realized what it is. In these conversations, it was always about like me. They always were concerned about me. And I don't mean that in a narcissistic kind of way. What I mean is they weren't there to say, share an experience from your life so I can one-up it. Or let me hear a little bit from you and then I'll tell you a lot about me. It was always like, hey, what's going on? And you're like, wow, that sounds amazing. Tell me something else. Tell me something. And so like the whole time, they're literally interested in you. And then you leave there feeling like this person really cared about me. They really valued me. I feel better. I feel better whether I vented or whether I shared some accomplishments, and they were just so affirming. And so I would say, okay, now take that into your family situations. Like what if you did that? Like my goal when I talk to Uncle Frank is I want Uncle Frank to leave this conversation feeling like $1 million, like Jeff values me. He cares about me. He's poured into me. He's talked to me. By the way, I do not have an Uncle Frank, so I'm just throwing that out there. But yeah, I think that's, some things to take into your holiday moments.
Absolutely. And keeping that in mind during holiday conversations, Thanksgiving convos with, the nutty uncle, or whoever it is.
Yeah.
But keeping that in mind of, I'm going to make this about you so you can feel loved. And maybe that'll help change the relationship because you clearly don't care about me.
That's right.
You care about your thing. And so, but when they realize, oh, wow, this person really cares about me, it could trigger the question in their own mind, do I care like that about anybody? You know what I mean?
Right,
and it could bring in those healthy, self-dialogue things that we don't even get to see happening that are happening based off the way we live.
Sure.
But if we don't choose that first and we go into it hostile and angry and wanting to pick a fight and wanting to have that fight so we can have an excuse to leave,
right,
it'll never happen.
That's right.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Well, I think for me too, my grandpa always hated religious people. So that's kind of a funny thing. So my grandpa always hated religious people, and he would mock them, talk about them. And so then, of course, I get radically saved, and then I go into ministry. And so, I come home for a Thanksgiving or a Christmas, or we have a family gathering. And for him, I know it had to be I was always his favorite grandson. I knew it. And now I'm one of those people. And I think he was kind of feeling this out. And so I intentionally didn't hey, Grandpa, where are you with Jesus? I intentionally kind of held back from that. Because I thought, he's going to be in my life the rest of my life and until he passes. And he has, by now, God rest his soul. But, I just tried to be the same kind of guy. And I wanted him to leave with, I thought Christians were always condemning or judgmental, and my grandson still loves me, still cares about me. Now, I'll be honest, over the years, I did talk to him about where was he with the Lord, and I shared things Jesus was doing in my life. And at one point, I directly talked to him about his need for Christ. But I couldn't have gotten to that if I hadn't focused initially on, I think, being winsome and just, showing my grandpa how much I loved him. He was still the same kind of ornery guy he'd always been, but I didn't care. I still loved him, spent time together, spent a lot of hours fishing together. I think that's a part of it too, investing, like you said, in the long game.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think is the best way to diffuse tension when it comes up? Because sometimes the conflict isn't between you and a person, it's between two people you love, and you're like, I really don't want to see you guys go at it right now. How do you diffuse tension?
That's so hard, because I am a peacemaker. I really am. Like if suddenly two people start fighting, I just want to jump in. Stop. Let's all, can we just, as though if you mentioned, let's just love each other. Let's just stop arguing. Oh, okay. I didn't think about that. There's just very little you can do, I think, in many ways, but as much as possible, you try to, judo. Judo is, taking the aggression of one person and turn it into your weapon, or using their effort as your defense, kind of thing. And so if there was just some way, and you've got to think on the fly, and a lot of times it just doesn't happen. And I could think of a situation right now which I can't articulate because it may be that my family would listen to this. But I can remember a time when there was great conflict going on between two members of my family that I loved, and I couldn't do anything but watch. And so I just prayed. And I was sitting here thinking, okay, God, you're powerful. Prayer does stuff. Like, I know that your hand moves when we seek you out. And so I was just like, Lord, I can't stop what I see happening right now. And these are people who are entrenched, and their feelings took over, and they were, out of emotion and anger, were going at each other. And I wouldn't matter what. It's like trying to get between two dogs that are fighting. Like, you know, you just got to let them finish, because there's just nothing you can do to pull them apart from each other, in general. And so that's
without really endangering yourself.
Yeah, you're going to get bit. Yeah, I mean, that's really what it is. You're going to be the one who gets bit. And so I just prayed. They end up huffing and puffing at each other for a while. There were tears, there was anger, they separated. And then, of course, the whole room is like, everything stinks at that point.
Well,
like,
that sucks all the energy out of
Nobody's
the room.
happy. Nobody wants to do anything. And it just kind of ruins everything. And then it reminds me, too, of just how selfish we get in the midst of our arguments. Like, I'm so determined to show them right. You're going to lose everything. You're going to lose the other person. You're going to lose the room. You spoil everybody else's time. Like, your selfishness in the midst of that moment ruined this moment in this holiday. And ultimately, like in that particular holiday, the family left. They ended up leaving our house and not coming back. And it was just like, it just stunk. And I was like, this is horrible. And I think it's a combination of pride and selfishness that gets in the midst of it. Now, to say this, like if everybody were to say, well, what about, like, I got my own stuff too. I mean, we're talking about the ideal and how this works, and we're talking as bystanders, but when you're in it, it is so hard. And so I do think prayer and humility are great first steps. And that would be like things I need to remember as well when we're in these tense situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things too, for all of our listeners out there or watchers on YouTube. Know that grace abounds for you. Know that grace abounds for you. It abounds for us.
That's right.
We are talking about the ideals here,
That's right.
But the world is not perfect.
That's right.
And it is hard. It is not easy.
I'm thinking, if I have any family members watch this, can I just say, that story, if it sounds familiar, it's not you.
It's not you.
It's not you. It was another family member altogether.
And it's interesting because there are some families on almost the opposite side who are like, our family dynamic is really fun.
Oh, I know.
I
always hate those families. Yeah. And I would tell them to their face.
I would let them know it too. But that's one of the things, though, and it's there's been tension points, in my family over the years, as there always is.
Right.
You get to a point where you start realizing the things that are really important, and it's so helpful when they're all believers. And I'm fortunate enough to be in a family where we all are believers, and that we would look at one another with those mindsets. And even if something comes up, because again, like I said, we play a lot of board games.
Yeah.
Sometimes someone interprets the rule differently. It can become an intense moment as we realize, can you split a road with a settlement in Catan? And you're trying to figure that out. But you lace it with grace and you realize, you know what? It's a board game. We're fine.
Right.
But to those families, I would say, and because this is something I've challenged myself on as well, is walk alongside someone who might not have that family dynamic and love them well, because them seeing how your family operates or hearing about that could encourage them to be like, that could happen.
Yeah.
Or maybe I can create that in my new family.
Right.
And so even if a lot of these conversations don't apply to you, it still applies to you in the sense that someone I love is probably going through something like this this time of year, and I can check in on them and see how they're doing and pray for them and walk alongside them.
Right. And I would encourage too, if anybody thinks like it's kind of too late for me, I've ruined my family dynamic, I was like, that is not true. As long as you draw breath, you can fix this thing, or you can make it different. And so if it's like, I don't even like to see my family at Christmas anymore, if somebody's at some extreme like that, I would say show up anyway. Like let's remember that God still moves. He still changes things. Pray before you go. Try to be different yourself. I guarantee you invest in that kind of thing for a few years, you're going to see some differences. Now, it may not be the Norman Rockwell painting, but it might be something that is a much better version than it is right now, and you're the one who helped bring that about. So continue to be humble, to show back up. And like all of these dynamics that I've seen in our families over the years, where things were great, and then they got rough with some people, and then they got great, and then they were rough. Like I think, right now, I think we're at basically a point of peace in my family on both sides. And, but that, it doesn't mean what happened in the past isn't there anymore, but we've gone past it. We've grown.
Yeah. It's, and And just, I don't know, as you were talking about that, I'm like, it's like the stock market. It's going to go up, it's going to go down.
That's right.
But then it's going to go higher than where it used to be the peak, and then it's going to go down. But then and then you see the general trend, hopefully,
in the right direction.
Of it being in the right direction, and you getting to the end and being, I'm happy that this is what I stuck with.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so as we close up this Thanksgiving podcast, the most important question, what is your favorite dish for Thanksgiving?
Oh, that's so important. Can I, like, I would just say dessert in general, and then I'm really wide open at that point. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I love a good pumpkin pie. I love a good, fresh, homemade pumpkin pie. I really do. But, like, I am open to other desserts. I don't like to discriminate. I'm a very inclusive dessert connoisseur, and so whatever you have made, I will probably try. I will almost definitely enjoy. I'll have multiple helpings of, like, that would be me. What about you?
My Aunt Sharon makes a family recipe of stuffing / dressing, however you want to call it. But that dish, and it's got like an apple in it, and it's got about 20 sticks of butter, and it's, oh man, I love stuffing so much. That is my favorite part of the Thanksgiving meal is stuffing. I could eat all of it. Like it's so good.
I'm salivating right now just listening to you.
I know. That's 20 sticks of butter. Incredible. Well, thanks so much for talking to us about Thanksgiving dynamics, and I hope you have a pleasant and joyous Thanksgiving.
Amen. And you as well.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this production from Sandhills Media Ministry. This episode was produced and hosted by John Dabeck. Audio mixing and camera work by Sean Weigner. Post-production by Erich Weigner. And special thanks to our guest and lead pastor, Jeff Philpott. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please consider supporting us through liking, subscribing, and sharing on your social media. It does more than you know to fuel this project. If you'd like to know more about Sandhills or join us on a Sunday, you can do so at sandhillschurch.org.